Hey guys, what's up? MadSeason here, back with another video for you. After many years, we're back with another episode in the Azeroth Arsenal series. Vanilla World of Warcraft for many represents a unique period of growth within the MMORPG genre. It's a time before uniqueness was sacrificed for the sake of balance, and while many say that results in a lot of wonky and broken crap, others say that it brings a bit of charm to the game. The itemization in vanilla, if nothing else, has some sort of lasting charm, and are even referenced today either in retail or in various classic remakes. So in this video, we're going to cover some of the most interesting or unique or weird items in Vanilla World of Warcraft. Each item on this list has earned its spot due to its iconic status within the game, or perhaps more so due to the interesting backstory behind them. First up, one of the rarest items in the game, even today, 20 years later, is the Contest Winner's Tabard. When the game first launched, it did so without an honor system, which was added a few months later. Before then, the only reason to PvP was for the fun of it and bragging rights, and for a short while, the Tabard. Blizzard held a contest between what would become an iconic PvP hotspot, Terran Mel vs South Shore in Hillsbrad, one of the first areas where the Alliance and Horde met. They held an event where the person with the most kills per server walked away with this special tabard. So seeing it out in the wild is incredibly rare, and consider yourself lucky if you ever do, as most of the few owners of this item have since quit. But it's definitely iconic, almost as iconic as the virtual private network service, ExpressVPN. When you browse the web, it's almost guaranteed that your internet service provider logs your online activity. This data can then be sold to data brokers or other companies for their own use, and if that concerns you like it does me, then you might want to consider ExpressVPN. It's compatible with a wide range of devices like smartphones, iPads, laptops, and PCs, and it runs quietly in the background without draining your resources, all while adding an essential layer of privacy and security. A VPN functions like a secure proxy, creating an encrypted connection to route your online traffic through its servers. And ExpressVPN in particular doesn't keep logs of your activity, so while your ISP may be able to see that you're connected to ExpressVPN, they can't see what you're actually doing online. You can connect to servers from around the world, making it look like you're browsing from a different country. I found this to be extremely handy for services like Netflix, which offers one of my favorite TV shows of all time, Cowboy Bebop, but it's not available in the US. But by connecting to a server in Japan, I can stream it without issues. If this sounds like something you would benefit from, head on over to expressvpn.com/madseason. There's a Black Friday/Cyber Monday deal going on right now, where you get 4 extra months with the 12-month plan, or 6 extra with the 24-month plan, totally free. And you can find out more by using the QR code on screen or by finding the link in the description box below. Anyways, believe it or not, the next item on our list is even more rare. In fact, only one person in the entire game has ever obtained it, and that's the Talisman of the Binding Shard. This was a legendary amulet that dropped off of the Gar boss within the Molten Core raid, and Blizzard had never intended for players to obtain it, but they forgot to remove it from the loot table. It was originally intended to be part of a quest related to constructing Thunder Fury, but it was scrapped for some reason. One player, however, would be the lucky recipient, and that's Noctin of the Guild Unearthed. And once word spread, Blizzard quickly scrambled and they hotfixed it out of the game, but they did allow Noctin to keep his, which made him the only person to ever obtain it. The amulet had some physical DPS stats, resistances, and a Thorns effect, and it gave the player a lightning orb as a graphic, similar to the Shaman's lightning shield, making it the only amulet in the game that gave a visual effect at the time. Next up, we have the Skull of Impending Doom. This goes down as an item that, during original vanilla, when most people got it, they quickly vendored it, not knowing how immensely useful it is. This was a reward from a short quest chain that started in the Badlands zone, which first sent you to Uldaman, and then to retrieve some reagents from elite enemies spread throughout the world. One from Stranglethorn, another from the Altric Mountains, and the last from the Dustwallow Marsh. It's an intellect offhand weapon, which when used, increased your run speed by 60% for 10 seconds, but also drained health and mana during the duration. Aside from the speed boost, this would be very useful in PvP as the damage inflicted could actually be useful in breaking crowd control effects, such as sheep or sap or hunter traps. Crowd control, as many people know, was incredibly powerful in vanilla, as it was before they were limited to 11 seconds, so anything to counter that was quite crucial. In fact, this item was so powerful that some players who had vendored it would actually remake their characters. And this is even the nerfed version. The original just dealt a set amount of small damage scaled to its level 41 eye level, and it was only after it was popularized by a prolific PvPer, Swifty, that it caught the attention of Blizzard, where it was quickly nerfed. And later in the Burning Crusade, it was made to be even more punishing, draining 60% health and mana over time on use. But it's definitely one of Vanilla's most defining items, at least within the PvP realm. This next one is for all of the twinks out there, in-game that is, or in real life too, if that's your thing, whatever, it's for everyone. And it's what is probably the most iconic twink weapon to ever exist, and that's the Pendulum of Doom. For those who may be confused, let's go over a little history. When Battlegrounds were first released, they were split up into different brackets, and that's 10 to 19, 20 to 29, and so on, all the way up to 50 to 59, with 60 having its own bracket. So while this was done to ensure that queues were relatively active, no matter what level you were, a side effect was that people would make what were called twinks, which were characters who stayed at the maximum level for that bracket, and then deck them out with the best gear and consumables possible. Compared to a normal, innocent, poor quester, these characters were many times more powerful, and it would become popular enough that the winner of these battlegrounds would essentially be the side with the most twinks. And while there were many highly powerful weapons to be found, one of the most iconic would become the Pendulum of Doom, which was a level 39 two-handed axe found within the Alderman dungeon. 39 DPS, a hefty proc, and perhaps most importantly, an extremely slow 4.0 speed, which was important because many attacks in the game were based off of weapon damage, so the slower the weapon, the higher the damage and the higher the specials, and the more potential for burst in general. And with it being right at the top of the level bracket at 39, it would hold the best possible stats. But aside from its strength, what made the weapon iconic was its extreme rarity, having just a 0.02% chance to drop from just a handful of mobs within the dungeon. So because of this, it would become one of the most expensive items throughout vanilla and future expansions until in Cataclysm when XP was added to the battlegrounds, which would essentially kill the twinking community. But even still, it would always fetch a high price for collectors. Next up, we have the Edgemaster's Handguards. Seems innocent enough. Level 44 mail gloves, purple, increased skill with axes, daggers, and swords by 7 each. Just a weird vanilla item, but oddly enough, this would become one of the best pairs of gloves in the game for most warriors until they reached the final raid tier, Nexramus. Weapon skill, as it turned out, was one of the most important DPS stats in vanilla World of Warcraft, and it has to do with the glancing blow mechanic. This is a combat dynamic where the weapon skill of an attacker is equated against the defense of its target. The larger disparity in favor of the target's defense, the more glancing blows will occur, which are sort of like the opposite of crits. They're attacks which have heavily reduced damage or are otherwise mitigated through parries and dodges and stuff. So since for each level, the maximum cap of these stats raises by 5, a level 60 attacking a level 60 typically results in an even match of weapon skill versus defense. But by equipping these gloves, the player is given an advantage in weapon skill, and therefore they perform fewer glancing blows as well as critting and hitting more. It's because of this is why humans and orcs are by and large to be seen as the best in raiding in vanilla World of Warcraft due to their weapon skill ratios. But for those who opted for other races, these gloves would be highly sought after as they were a huge DPS increase. And similarly, in the same vein, next up on our list we have the Hungering Cold. 73 DPS, 1.5 speed, armor, stamina, and most importantly, sword skill. This is dropped from the final boss of the game, Kel'Thuzad, and it would become one of the best swords for both rogues and warriors. But what really earns it a spot on this list isn't its power, nor even its difficulty to get, but rather its model. In 2006, a popular cartoon series, South Park, made an episode about World of Warcraft. The boys were getting harassed by a hacker terrorizing the game world, and the only way to stop him, as foretold by a developer named Saltzman, was by obtaining a weapon called the Sword of a Thousand Truths. This episode would quickly become one of the series' most popular, even to this day, and while this weapon didn't actually exist in the game, it used the same model as the Hungering Cold. And in fact, when Naxxramas was re-released in the Wrath of the Lich King expansion, this model would make a return with the Slayer of the Lifeless weapon, which held the flavor text, as foretold by Saltzman. Owing more to their uniqueness from their rarity, next up we have a triple, and that's the Collector's Edition pets. With each expansion launch, you're typically offered a few options in purchasing the game. The Standard Edition, the Deluxe Edition, and the Collector's. When World of Warcraft first launched in 2004, no one really knew just how popular it would become, not even Blizzard. So because of this, the amount of collector's editions that they made was comparatively very low by today's standards. This would not only make these copies themselves extremely rare and highly sought after today, but also the rewards they held. Owners of these editions, as a reward for their support, were offered one of 3 unique pets of their choice, which was the Zergling from their StarCraft series, the Mini Diablo from Diablo, and also a Panda Cub. These pets were never re-released, nor re-implemented into the game, not even today, 20 years later, making them extremely rare to witness out in the wild. And the only way to obtain them today is to either buy the code or a sealed collector's edition entirely, both of which fetch outrageously high prices. Throughout World of Warcraft's 20-year run, there have been hundreds of mounts of all varieties added to the game. Some are more coveted than others, of course, usually due to their looks or rarity, but the next item on our list had both, and that's the Death Charger's Reins. Deep within the Stratholme dungeon on the undead side, players could find the boss Baron Rivendare, who sits atop his undead steed. Earlier we talked about the Pendulum of Doom and its extreme rarity, holding just a 0.02% chance to drop from a selection of level 40 mobs. And though the drop rate for this mount was eventually buffed to 0.1% in the retail version of the game, in vanilla it had just a 0.01% chance to drop, and it was off just one level 60 enemy, the Baron himself. So while most people farm him for his tier 0 and a selection of pre-rating best in slot, everyone also carries a very small hope that he'll drop one of the rarest mounts ever. Next up on our list, we have the Blade of Eternal Darkness. This is another boss drop, this time from the final boss of the Moradin dungeon, Princess Theridress. A much higher drop rate on this one compared to some of the others, at 2%, but it would eventually become a highly sought after item, particularly by mages due to its proc, which had a chance to deal shadow damage and return mana on a spell hit. Although this was quite powerful in its own right, it would especially shine within the boosting community that took over the 2019 re-release of the game, where mages gather up a bunch of mobs within a dungeon and then AoE them down all at once. Some farms would be made far easier, and some even straight up required it, as it would essentially give mages infinite mana. Boosting itself would become a highly controversial aspect of the game, as it was intertwined deeply with RMT, as well as hurting the social aspect of the game, as many were able to sit AFK in dungeons to level to 60. Next up, we have a pretty iconic piece of vanilla history, and that's Timalane's Phylactery. This has to do with the Ashbringer story, which I've covered recently before, so I'll try to keep it short here. As big as vanilla was, there's quite a lot of content that was left on the cutting room floor, one of which being the Ashbringer questline. Within the final raid of the game, Naxxramas, players could loot the corrupted Ashbringer from its wielder, Alexandros Mograine. This on its own is quite a memorable weapon, but little did many know it was destined for greater things, as evidenced by its unique properties. If players took it into the cathedral wing of the Scarlet Monastery dungeon, a special event would trigger where the cult becomes friendly and they make comments towards the wielder, culminating with a special event where the ghost of Alexandros smites his son. Talking to the hidden Inquisitor Fairbanks, he references that there may be a way to cleanse the legendary weapon, and that the answer lies within Mograine's other lost son, who is residing in the Outland. As history has shown, the Outland would eventually see its release in the game's first expansion, the Burning Crusade, but it was originally planned to be in the base version of the game. It was removed due to a lack of time, and along with it, the path to cleansing the corrupted Ashbringer. However, partly due to the legendary version existing within the game files, this didn't stop the players from rampantly scouring the world in search of a way to do so, and eventually, in desperation, they would turn their focus on the next item on our list, Timalane's Phylactery. A phylactery is a scroll of incantations that holds the soul of a lich, which is an undead enemy type in the game. Kel'Thuzad, for example, is a lich. Timalane's phylactery dropped from large vile slimes, which were found in the Weeping Cave in the Western Plagueland Zone. In his life, he was a swordsmith for the Scarlet Crusade, and at one point he was tasked with crafting the weapon for High Lord Mograine, and upon doing so he was killed and fed to the oozes within the Plaguelands. And the only issue was that this item had seemingly no use. There wasn't a quest associated with it, it wasn't used as a reagent for anything, so it left players scratching their head as to what its intended purpose was, and with his link to the Scarlet Crusade and a Mograine, eventually players had determined that it was somehow linked to cleansing the Ashbringer and bringing it to its true form. They would take it to the Scarlet Monastery, Nextramus, and all corners of the world, hoping that there existed a secret event like the one that was found within the monastery when holding the Ashbringer. However, the boring truth was that it was all a mistake. At some point there had been a quest associated with the phylactery, but it was cut, and when Blizzard removed the quest, they forgot to remove the item associated with it, and in the process of doing so, this one simple mistake led an entire community on one of the most time-wasting goose chases in video game history. The whole debacle was referenced many years later in the Legion expansion with the hidden artifact appearance for the Ashbringer artifact weapon. Earlier we covered the Edgemaster's Handguards, an item that, despite its low level, ended up being one of the most powerful in the entire game. Another one can be found from a level 4 quest in the starting zone for humans, and that's the Bag of Marbles. On use, decreases a target's chance to hit by 25% with 10 charges. At this point in the game, this and many other low-level quest rewards didn't diminish in effectiveness against higher-level enemies. Even raid bosses were usually susceptible to them, and the Bag of Marbles provided a great way to mitigate damage in an emergency. It's one of those items that you hold on to for a rainy day, with many guilds usually opting to save it for their first few kills of Patchwork and Extramus, who has very high physical damage. If enough raiders have it, you can rotate them throughout the fight and essentially give your tank a 25% chance for a missed hit. When mentioning useful low-level rewards, it's almost impossible to not mention the Light of Elune. This was another Alliance-only item. It is the reward for a level 20 quest in the Ashenville zone, providing immunity to all damage for 10 seconds upon use for one single time. Unlike other immunity effects in the game, this one doesn't pacify you, which made it extremely powerful. It's become especially useful for the game's recent hardcore mode, which has permanent character death. Since it lasts for exactly 10 seconds, you can macro it with your Hearth, which gives you an extra life. And since we just mentioned PvP, we also have to mention one of the most powerful and one of the most competitive items in the entire game, and that's the Title Charm. On use, stuns the target for 3 seconds, 15-minute cooldown, usable from 30 yards. My girlfriend agrees. 3 seconds is a lot, and with it being range, it fills out the toolkit of pretty much every class in the game. Aside from the insignias, it's arguably the best PvP trinket, so of course it also has to be the most annoying to obtain. It drops off of the rare Prince Nazjack mob, who resides underwater within the level 30 Arathi Highland zone, and he has a respawn timer of around 2 days. He's horrendously camped 24/7, even on PvE servers, and it's only a 50% drop chance, so only the very few most dedicated or lucky or crazy players ever see this coveted trinket. But that's about it. Like I said, if anything, vanilla is known for its charm. While a lot of these items are pretty broken and wonky, they're also quite memorable, I think. There are definitely more to cover, probably something we'll come back to at some point, but until then, I hope you enjoyed this video. Like it if you liked it, because I'll see you in the next one. Peace.
Farewell for now, mortals. We hope you enjoyed today's video. See you again soon.